Hi guys, it's Debbie, and after my usual yearly video about the best films of the year, here comes my usual video about the worst titles. Although the viewing process of these films is often painful and disappointing, it's actually a great and fun topic to talk about and a great video to make. As every year, here comes my usual premise. These are high-profile films that are terrible. These are big films that are just big. They're not good. And let's kick off with a film which is spectacularly bad. Moonfall.
I'm gonna get you home.
This is the kind of film we would need every year for a worst films of the year video. Everything is so wrong with this film that I was actually enjoying watching it just to find out what on earth they would put in the next scene. With very debatable science, this film is all about the moon, how it's hurtling towards planet Earth, an unlikely team is sent off into space to save the world and figure out what mysterious event is actually causing the moon to go off course. I don't even know where to begin with this film, setting aside the science side of things, because in the end it is fun to watch this huge moon coming towards Earth, the giant waves it's causing, people panicking and destroying cities. The problem with this film is the chaos with which all of the rest is delivered. First of all, the whole NASA situation is a mess. There is no hierarchy, no secrecy, no chain of command. I still have no clue what Halle Berry actually was at NASA. At first she looks like a random astronaut. Next thing she's commanding people and making decisions that will impact the whole world. Because again, here we have a handful of people in the US who are making decisions that will impact the whole world without consulting anybody else. By the way, when NASA calls Halle Berry's character, her phone just says NASA, not the name of a colleague or a superior, just NASA, like directory number NASA. The group of astronauts then teams up with a conspiracy theorist who for some reason has access to just top secret information and technology. The dialogues between them are either jokes or hero one-liners. There is no continuity in what has happened, it's just one random disaster scene after another. But director Roland Emmerich is an expert in disaster movies or over-the-top movies in general. He directed both Independence Day films, 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow, White House Down. Anyway, Moonfall is bad, but you do have fun while watching it. Now let's move on to a film I didn't have fun watching. Black Adam.
I didn't bring a passport.
We don't need passports.
I'm quite an enjoyer of DC content. I watched all the DCU films and enjoyed most of them, but Black Adam just doesn't make it. And I tried to watch it as unbiased as possible, trying to not think of Dwayne Johnson, but it's just bad. Black Adam is an ancient figure with superpowers who is awakened after thousands of years, and a team of superheroes sent to try to stop him from wreaking havoc with his powers. Now, Black Adam is portrayed by Dwayne Johnson, who is an incredibly specific actor. At the moment, he is only typecast as this uber strong figure with strong values, whether good or bad, only speaks through catchy one-liners and is there to save or destroy everything. There is no nuance. When you watch his recent films, you know what to expect. And this all works great with either ironic films like Baywatch, in which he basically parodied himself, or those disaster monster movies which are just like that. But the way he's been portraying his roles lately and the way he promotes them in his personal life seem to have been shifting towards this nearly superheroic figure, and it feels like Black Adam was just him finally being the peak Dwayne Johnson stereotype. And after a succession of good films like Wonder Woman, The New Justice League, Aquaman, even Birds of Prey, this doesn't feel like a film about a superhero. It feels like a film about Dwayne Johnson, a Dwayne Johnson who finally achieved the figure he craved. Anyway, all of that set aside, how was the rest of the film? I don't know if I'm becoming super picky or boring, but compared to the current standard for visual effects and with a budget of over $200 million, they felt quite subpar. And even the action sequences in some moments weren't that great, with the villains basically not being able to fight or just standing around until they get hit by something. The character development was basically non-existent, starting from the fact that Dwayne Johnson acts with his regular Dwayne Johnson voice and accent, regardless of the fact that his character is thousands of years old, and his behaviour is completely incongruent with what we know about his character, all while the Justice Society is chasing him down and announcing, "We are the Justice Society." But I guess the outcome of this film was quite predictable given the path Dwayne Johnson's roles have been taking in the last years. I probably would have been more surprised if this had been a solid good film. And what a terrible year it's been for DC and Warner Bros in general. Projects failing, actors having world famous criminal records, one of the most public trials in history, actors confirmed and then cancelled the next week. No wonder it seems like they're trying to wrap up everything and start again from scratch. But don't worry DC, in 2022 Marvel also gave us a little gem to put in this list. Morbius, the film you will see on all lists of the worst films of 2022. If we knew Dwayne Johnson wasn't a particularly good actor and definitely not versatile, Jared Leto is the opposite. He is well known for being a good actor. He starred in Dallas Buyers Club, Blade Runner 2049, Fight Club, American Psycho, Requiem for a Dream, but in the last years he's entered a bit of an awkward phase, starring as Joker in the heavily criticised Suicide Squad. He had a bizarre role in House of Gucci. He starred in The Little Things with Denzel Washington, which also wasn't received well, and now Morbius.
What else can I do?
Morbius is the story of a scientist with a rare blood disease who, while trying to find a cure for it, basically turns himself into a vampire. Now, the premise of the film is quite interesting, also because it adds a horror twist to the superhero genre, but the delivery was atrocious, to the point that people just couldn't take it seriously and ended up just making memes after memes out of it, and to the point that Jared Leto even joked about it.
What are you reading?
Nothing really, just,
No. Reading.
Oh, well.
Usually Marvel characters are very impactful, whether they're villains or heroes, but there wasn't anything that very memorable about Morbius. There wasn't something that would make us love him, empathise with him, or hate him. The lines were very underwhelming. The effects went up to the standards of the franchise. Storylines were set up and then just abandoned. There was no logic behind the characters' actions. The settings were full of cliches and unrealistic. The continuity between scenes was non-existent, and the whole story was introduced through the most blatant exposition. All of this in addition to the fact that basically audiences were baited into thinking that Spider-Man was in the film. Next up, we have another film which features superpowers, but in a different genre. Firestarter, a horror film, or what was supposed to be a horror film. Now, from the trailer, this didn't look that bad. It's the story of this kid who has the ability of controlling fire, but when she loses her patience or something bad happens, she loses control of her power and ends up hurting people and damaging her surroundings. Her father, who also has the power of telepathy, tries to keep things as hidden as possible, but it's not that easy, and they soon end up on the run. This film had a lot of potential which was completely wasted and was developed in the most underwhelming manner possible. To the point that the opening title sequence, which explains how the characters got these powers, was actually more interesting than the whole rest of the film. And it ends up not feeling like a horror movie, but more of a family movie, a coming-of-age story. There was no fear, no gripping the edge of your seat, no jump scares, no sadness. For example, there is a scene in which the girl accidentally hurts an animal, and of course it's frustrating and depressing because she just can't control her powers, but it was developed in the most cringe-worthy manner possible, with what I swear was the cheapest cat meowing sound effect added. The villains in the film who try to find this girl and her father look like something out of a kids' afternoon comedy series. Let's just say this film is very far from what it advertises itself as, and it's a pity that many were drawn to it as it's based on Stephen King's work, from whom we've received The Shining, Misery, The Green Mile, Carrie, The Shawshank Redemption. Even more recent projects like Gerald's Game were really creepy. But along we go, and next up is Pinocchio. Not this Pinocchio, the other Pinocchio movie that was released in 2022. The Disney live action one, although I would scrap the words live action as there is nothing live in this film. This is one giant green screen with a bunch of digitally created characters. There is nothing real in this film. Even objects or characters that didn't need to be digitally enhanced or created were made digitally. I know obviously characters like Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket couldn't be portrayed by real actors, but it got to the point in which everything was digitally created. You could even tell that some of the kids on the carriage taking them to Pleasure Island were digitally created. I mean, didn't Disney have enough money to pay a couple of extra actors? When this film was announced back in the day, it did receive some criticism because it was the time in which Disney was announcing all these live action remakes. But I think by now we've all just accepted that this is the new way Disney is proceeding. They're just remaking all the Disney classics. Then when the cast was announced, it received even more backlash, as Cynthia Erivo was cast as a blue fairy, as well as other characters which many thought didn't correspond to the imagery from the original film. And after watching this film, I can guarantee you that the cast is the last problem this film has. This film completely lacks the charm of the original film, as well as the message it conveyed. The original story was actually really scary in some points, as it showed how misbehaving can lead you to ruin you in your life, and how you can count on some important people in your life who look out for you. For example, the whole Pleasure Island sequence from the original movie is a moment that many remember as being absolutely terrifying. The idea of the beer or a cigar was haunted as a kid, and the donkey transformation scene calling out for his mother was so sad. But in this new version, all of that was scrapped in lieu of showcasing just how much CGI could be packed into the film. For example, instead of focusing on creating a creepy and memorable environment, the characters just chug down CGI root beer while watching more and more CGI environments and characters move past them. They dive into CGI sweets and dive into CGI water. At this point, why even bother making a live action film? Now let's talk about Blonde, the film everybody thought would amaze us, and it did in all the wrong ways. Blonde is the story of Marilyn Monroe, or let's say a very free-handed take on Marilyn Monroe's life. People who have studied her life have said that a lot of scenes never happened. Marilyn Monroe was a very famous actress and model who unfortunately was never appreciated for her talent, but exploited for her looks in every possible manner, being underpaid, mistreated, and established as a, quote, dumb blonde. This 2022 film was presented to audiences as the real Marilyn, the misunderstood Marilyn, the behind-the-scenes Marilyn, so of course everybody was excited. Until we watched it, and it was literally exploiting her again, with fake information added, all of course with a character mostly naked. She's talking with her husband, get those boobs out. She's at home alone, make her naked. This film is mostly exaggerated sex scenes, punctuated by scenes of Marilyn being sad. That's it. Her life was sad, but did you see how hot she was? After the awful reception this film had after it was released, the director still had an opportunity to talk about the film, to defend it, to explain maybe how he wanted to represent that exploitation of Marilyn, to show what she really had to endure, and to see how we exploit famous people. But instead he chose some very bold statements, like the fact that nobody watches Marilyn Monroe's films, and that some famous scenes of her were just romanticized whoredom. That apparently she wanted to ruin her life, and then he downplayed his own film, saying it's just a movie about Marilyn Monroe, and there are going to be a lot more movies about Marilyn Monroe. So if the movie was bad, this definitely didn't help. Next up, we need to talk about Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore.
Are you kidding me right now?
Hold your pitchforks. I know this film isn't awful. It's probably the best out of all the films on today's list, but it is bad. And most importantly, it's the proof that the Fantastic Beasts saga isn't working, and at this point we're just polishing brass on Titanic. I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter world, and when the books and films came to an end, myself and many other people in the world were desperate to get more content on our characters, and the studios of course were happy to feed it to us as it's one of the most lucrative sagas. So they created this spin-off based off of a very minor character in the saga, Newt Scamander, or to better say somebody who doesn't even exist in the main saga. He's the author of one of the books the characters study at school. So see already how we're squeezing the material. Then they decided to make 5 films out of it, and of course, as Harry Potter fans, we were excited. We couldn't wait to get back into the wizarding world, and the first film, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, actually went quite well. By the second one, we were realizing how this couldn't really work in the long term. These were not the characters we grew up with, and it was basically becoming a spin-off of a spin-off. And now with this latest chapter, The Secrets of Dumbledore, it was apparent how the magic just wasn't working anymore. And from what we know, there are no longer plans to continue the franchise. The situation was worsened by the fact that over the years, J.K. Rowling was becoming extremely hated because of some statements she went public with. People were rereading the books as adults and pointing out her virtual signaling. Johnny Depp was fired and replaced by Mads Mikkelsen, who I must say did do a good job. So in general, it was a mess, and this final film was the depth of the mess. It's a ridiculously expensive mess with more information added, which we don't know if it's actually canon or not. The Harry Potter world was known to always amaze us and make us cry and laugh, and it would teach lessons. This instead was completely unremarkable, boring, incoherent, with a lack of cast chemistry. The only thing I can say is that given the circumstances, Mads Mikkelsen did a pretty decent job at portraying the new Grindelwald. Another unremarkable film from a famous franchise is the Netflix version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Try anything and you're cancelled, bro.
There are different versions of this film. My favorite one is probably the 2003 one, but what made these films stand out was how disgusting and terrifying they were. We're talking of a killer who wears his victim's skin and lives in a gross house full of gross and scary things. Well, Netflix came along and scrapped all that and made something that looks like a fan-made version. which just isn't scary. The story is basically the same. A group of friends end up in a ghost town where this creepy killer lives, and they end up being stalked by him. But the famous slasher elements, the ultra-violence, the gagging from the disgusting human memorabilia, and the bizarreness of the older characters was completely washed down. I felt like this was a version for a much younger audience, maybe an audience who is just starting to discover horror movies, but at this point, why remake such a big classic? Why not make something new for new audiences? But this isn't Netflix's only film on today's list, as we also have The Bubble, a film which planned to be received in a very specific way and failed at it.
Crystal just did a fucking TikTok with a dinosaur.
The Bubble is set at the peak of the COVID pandemic, when film sets basically became mini lockdown environments. Everybody was masked and tested. The characters of the movie are all members of a film crew who were locked down to film their latest movie. But things start to get out of hand because of all the rules and because everybody seems to have an odd personality. So it wanted to be a dark comedy making fun of the wild times we went through, with clever jokes that would be quoted on Twitter and become so funny and iconic. Instead, it was just painfully unfunny. I can't think of one scene that made me laugh. I mean, instead of keeping some form of high quality niche, even uncomfortable dark comedy, they made characters vomit on top of one another. Ooh, the first thing she does in lockdown is masturbate. How naughty and funny. Oh, looks like somebody is sick. But why stay safe when you can have sex? That's so funny. This is the perfect definition of an embarrassment of a film, and it cost $100 million. And last but not least on today's list is They Them, a horror movie, or let's say an attempt at making a horror movie. They Them is the story of a gay conversion camp, those places where kids are sent off by their parents in hopes they'll come back straight, and where they end up being abused and degraded. While they're there, some characters start to notice odd events going on, and this is where the horror is supposed to start. Supposed. There is nothing credible in this story, from the exaggerated and stereotyped manner in which the characters are portrayed, to the way the counselors talk to them, the jump scares which aren't jump scares because they're not scary, and the scene that made me want to punch through the screen was the one in which all the characters in their dorm decided to start singing and dancing together in this choreographed High School Musical style scene. What? If you really want to see a depressing and shocking film about gay conversion camps, I recommend Boy Erased, which is the true story of a guy who is sent by his parents to one of these camps, which are horrifying without being a horror film. There's no singing, no dancing, no clever snapping back at the counselors. Kids actually tried to kill themselves because of being sent to those camps. Anyway, getting back to us, that's a wrap on all the worst films of 2022. I would love to hear what you think about them, as well as my video about the best films of the year. I wish you a wonderful start of 2023, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.